Hey, welcome. Today we're going to talk about Nazi Germany, and we're really going to focus on post-World War I Germany. So we're going to look at the period from about 1918, the end of the war, through about 1923. Revolution in Germany. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm, Germany's emperor, began to abdicate, and he eventually fled the country, and you have the November Revolution. And this ends up with the formation of the Weimar Republic, which will be in existence up until Hitler takes over. Germany sought peace on November 11th, 1918, ending the war, and then they're going to go into peace negotiations. And the peace negotiations are going to result in a Treaty of Versailles for Germany, and this will happen on July 28th, 1919, so several months after the war, Germany will sign the Treaty of Versailles, and this officially ends German participation in World War I. So even though they stopped fighting way back in November, there's not a peace agreement until June. During the peace negotiations, Britain had a blockade set up against Germany, and one of the major reasons why Germany sought peace is because of starvation and industrial output troubles and lack of food and supplies and all these problems. And during this time where the Allies are negotiating a peace, because Germany is not even involved in the peace negotiations, thousands of Germans died from disease and starvation, from the blockade and other problems. So the Treaty of Versailles is going to be unpopular in Germany. They felt like they were forced to sign it because of the blockade, and they were going to have any other choice other than starting a war. First off, Germany had to accept blame for the war and say that it was their fault. And as it was their fault, they had to agree to pay huge reparations, which much of that money goes to France and Belgium, since they invaded those countries and created a lot of damage within those countries. Germany's forbidden to unite with Austria, who was their ally during World War I. And much of Germany's territory is lost. So Germany loses a lot of land and a lot of their population. So it lost about 13% of its land in Europe and about 10% of its population in Europe. And this includes Alsace-Lorraine, which would be returned to France, and land in eastern Germany, which would go to Poland and Czechoslovakia and help form some other countries as well. And they lost all of its colonies outside of Europe. The treaty was unpopular in Germany, as we said. And their military is going to be restricted to only 100,000 men. They're not allowed to have submarines, tanks, or an air force. And they could not have troops in Rhineland, which is along the French border, because France is scared they're going to attack for a third time after the Franco-Prussian War and World War I. And they will, and that'll be World War II. So the treaty is very unpopular for the amount of land and people Germany lost, from them having to accept blame, the reparation payments, which are going to be damaging for generations in Germany. And then you also have the military being severely weakened. So the government that they formed was the Weimar Republic, and the Weimar Republic was a parliamentary government with a president and a chancellor and members of parliament that would vote. Britain's going to struggle after World War I, and many people are going to blame the Weimar Republic for the problems that happened, although most of these problems stemmed even before the Weimar Republic was in power. So industrial output's going to drop, as it did toward the end of the war, but it's not going to really recover. German industrial output in 1923, several years after the war, was roughly half of what it was before the war in 1913. Germany's also going to have hyperinflation. For example, by like 1923, $1 in US dollars is equal to 1 trillion marks, which was the German currency. And the German currency is going to change throughout the 1920s. So what you owned before is not going to be worth much. They're going to say it's going to take basically a wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread. So people's life savings basically became worthless. People would burn their money for heat. They would use it as toilet paper. I mean, when it came out with new money at one point, people didn't even go pick it up because it wasn't even worth anything. It cost Germany more money at one point to actually print money than the money was actually worth itself. Then you have political struggles. We're going to talk about assassination attempts, revolutionary attempts, and then just the political struggle of the parliamentary system itself. So assassination attempts. You have the Fiume murders. And you have vigilantes, and these are people who are wanting payback. They feel like they are doing justice, taking justice into their own hands. So they murdered about 400 German politicians who they thought were traitors between 1919 and 1923, and they accused them of betraying Germany. So they blamed these people for the problems that were going on. They blamed these people for losing World War I, and they went ahead and killed over 400 politicians. And this was largely the far right, but also the far left. And you start to see these political extremes happening in Germany, where a lot of people aren't going in the middle on the moderates, but rather, on the extreme views of the political spectrum. We have lots of revolutionary attempts. One of these started before the Weimar Republic was even established and before the Treaty of Versailles was really even agreed upon. So in January 1919, you have the Spartacus uprising, and communists attempted to overthrow the Weimar Republic, and this brings out instability right away. So we're already only a couple months in, and there's already a revolutionary attempt that was almost successful, but ultimately failed. You have the Cat Push, which once again almost successful. The German army attempted to overthrow the Weimar Republic in 1920, so we're still talking 1920, just a couple years in. And the German army attempted to overthrow, and was really only stopped because the means of production, the factories, and all that was cut off. We will talk about one other one in 1923 with the Beer Hall Push later on, but you also have parliamentary struggles. The radical political parties gained more popularity, so people on the extreme left or extreme right of the political spectrum became more popular. We're talking later on about the communists and the Nazis, so that's extreme left for the communists and extreme right for the Nazis. And moderate political parties could not gain a majority in parliament. So you have these extreme groups really pushing people in directions that probably shouldn't be going. So the Nazi Party, which was previously known as the German Workers' Party, or at one point the German Socialist Workers' Party, Nazi Party was created after World War I. It's based on extreme nationalism, militarism, and propaganda. The Nazi Party believed that it wasn't the army that lost the war, but found many scapegoats that they blamed for the war, including the communists and the Jews. So they're anti-communist, anti-Semitic, which would mean they're against Jews. So a lot of the beliefs of the Nazi Party are very similar to Mussolini's fascist party, since the Nazi Party itself is fascist, but it also has this racial element. They embrace eugenics, which is this idea of creating the master race, and that some people are genetically better than other people. And their idea is to have a pure race with only the people who they have deemed desirable characteristics. And this would be called the master race or the Aryan race, which was in Germany, blonde hair, blue eyes, German ethnicity. And they also had groups called undesirables, and this could fit into a lot of different categories, but the one that's most famous would be Jews, because of the steps that the Nazi Party would take later to try to get rid of the Jewish population, not only in Germany, but in all of Eastern Europe and the worldwide. We'll talk more about those topics when we talk about the Holocaust. And by 1921, you have Adolf Hitler becoming the leader of the Nazi Party. So Adolf Hitler did not create the Nazi Party. So we talked about fascism in Italy, and Mussolini actually created the fascist party. Hitler embraced the ideas of the Nazi Party. He was considered a good speaker. He was very motivated in a way to recruit new members in the Nazi Party, and his speaking abilities and his efforts to recruit new members move him up to the top of the party. He's also considered ruthless, or was ruthless, and he helped create the SA, or the brown shirts, which is very similar to Mussolini's black shirts. And these people go around intimidating and using violence to get rid of enemies and causing disruption and instability in Germany, much like the black shirts did in Italy. And you have the Beer Hall Push, okay? So the Nazi Party has been around for a few years. By 1923, it's gained some popularity, although it's kind of a fringe party. It's an extreme party that doesn't have a lot of members, but more members than it probably should. And Adolf Hitler attempted to overthrow the German government during the Beer Hall Push, sometimes called the Munich Push as well. And Hitler declared a new government and marched to to Munich, hoping to eventually end up in Berlin and overthrow the government with his brown shirts, which are called the SA, and wanted to take power. So he walks into a meeting in Bavaria. He says he starts a new government. He takes a few hostages and organizes this march of a few thousand people to try to overthrow the government. So Hitler and 3,000 men were stopped by a few hundred, or maybe even just roughly 100 police officers in Munich, and Hitler ran away. He hid once shots were fired, as did many of the other Nazi people. And despite having huge numbers, really most of the Nazi party ended up scattering once they were confronted, with a couple exceptions. And the attempt to overthrow the government was unsuccessful. Adolf Hitler is going to be eventually arrested, and he's going to end up serving a few months in prison. So this is an act of treason. He's actually found guilty of treason, which most commonly being found guilty of treason results in execution. In this case, he was sentenced to the minimum 5-year sentence, but only served about 9 months in prison. And in prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. And people really start to follow Hitler. Hitler actually gets fan mail because of his extreme nationalism and his idea that Germany is great and all these other people are to blame for Germany's problems, and his views against communism and Jews and these groups within Germany that were unpopular. He starts to get a following, and he writes a book called Mein Kampf, which is a pretty thick book, outliner explaining his political views and future plans for Germany. And he writes this while in prison, and it talks about his ideas for the master race and getting rid of communists and getting rid of Jews and overthrowing the government and setting up a dictatorship and going and taking over much of the world. So all his views were already on display way back before he comes to power. So this is way back in 1923, 1924, that people could read his views. But yet he's still going to go ahead and be able to get power in Germany. Not now, because the beer hall push failed, and not real soon afterwards, because although the trial made him popular, or made him famous, and the Nazi party gained temporary popularity, there is going to be a stability and a resurgence in Germany with the golden 20s, and Germany is going to be popular or stabilized for about 5 years until the Great Depression. It's going to be the Great Depression that's really going to allow Adolf Hitler and the Nazi party to rise up the political ranks and eventually gain power in Germany. So the next lesson, we're going to talk about Adolf Hitler becoming dictator. We're talking about the golden 20s in Germany. We will talk about the stock market crash and the Great Depression and how that impacted things, and then the steps that Hitler took once he became chancellor to gain complete power. All right. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll talk to you later. Bye.